It was never designed to fight tanks. In fact, the weapon the Soviets hurried into existence in just a few frantic weeks wasn't even meant to face armor at all. It was built to crush bunkers, tear down walls, and break the brutal stalemates of urban warfare. But once unleashed, it did something no one expected. It started killing Germany's heaviest tanks with terrifying ease. What began as a stopgap solution became one of the most feared machines on the Eastern Front. This is the story of a self-propelled gun, born out of desperation, forged in chaos, and remembered as the accidental beast slayer of World War II. By the winter of 1942, the Red Army was bleeding in Stalingrad. German tanks were getting bigger, tougher, and more dangerous. Tigers, Panthers, and the massive Ferdinand tank destroyers were pushing into the front. Meanwhile, Soviet troops were still dragging towed artillery through snow, rubble, and ruined streets. Most of their guns couldn't keep up, couldn't hit hard enough, and couldn't survive counterattacks. Urban combat made everything worse. The battlefield wasn't open plains anymore. It was alleyways, shattered buildings, and fortified strongpoints. Light tank guns bounced off enemy armor, and crews often had to abandon their cannons when retreating or overrun. Soviet forces needed something that could move with infantry, take a hit, and obliterate anything in its path. They didn't need a perfect weapon. They needed a sledgehammer, and they needed it fast. The Red Army didn't have time to invent something new, so they hacked together something terrifying from parts they already had. They took the KV-1S heavy tank chassis, stripped off the turret, and dropped a massive 152mm howitzer right into the middle of it. No turret, no fancy tech, just a big gun in a steel box. The design, labeled Object 236, was brutal and simple. It used the ML-20 gun, originally meant to fire from behind the lines, now turned into a direct-fire blunt instrument. It could fire huge high-explosive shells meant to shatter bunkers and turn buildings to dust. From first sketch to working prototype, it took just 25 days. A record-breaking sprint powered by desperation, Soviet pragmatism, and wartime pressure. Testing was rushed. The gun worked. That was enough. The SU-152 was born, crude, underbuilt, but deadly. Factories started production almost immediately. It wasn't pretty, but it hit like a train, and the war was about to find out what it could do. The SU-152 wasn't just a gun, it was a demolition tool on tracks. Its 152mm shells were massive, two-part beasts weighing close to 50 kilos. Designed to smash fortifications, they didn't just destroy targets, they erased them. A single shot could collapse a house, vaporize a dug-in position, or snap a tank's armor like tin. It didn't matter if the shell didn't penetrate. The sheer blast force could kill crews through shock waves and flying fragments inside the tank. Spalling, concussions, ruptured welds. Even the most armored beasts weren't safe. There are records of Panzer IVs flipping over from the impact. That wasn't normal tank warfare. That was artillery fired point blank. Sure, it was slow to reload, carried only 20 rounds, and needed a cramped crew to muscle each shot into the breach. But accuracy didn't matter when everything within a few meters of impact ceased to exist. The SU-152 wasn't precise. It was final. July 1943. The Battle of Kursk was about to explode into the largest tank engagement in history, and for the first time, the SU-152 rolled onto the battlefield. Soviet command had barely managed to train crews before rushing the new weapon into service. The first 12 were formed into independent artillery regiments and sent straight into one of the most brutal armored clashes of the war. It didn't take long for the SU-152 to prove itself. German elephants, formerly known as Ferdinands, began advancing, confident in their nearly 200 millimeters of frontal armor. But then came the blast. At just 800 meters, an SU-152 fired. and the Elephant was torn apart. The shell didn't need to penetrate. The explosion crushed armor plates, killed the crew with shock and fragmentation, and left the tank burning. More kills followed. Tigers, Panthers, Panzer IVs all fell to the 152mm hammer. The SU-152 had found its unintended role: tank killer. Word spread fast. Troops started calling it by a new name: Zveroboy, the Beast Slayer. But Kursk was chaos. The fighting was thick with smoke, blood, and confusion. SU crews faced counterattacks, airstrikes, and snipers. Their machines were slow to reload and easy to spot once they fired. Yet even under pressure, they held the line, destroying German armor in a role they were never designed for. The Beast Slayer had arrived, and the enemy knew it. For all its brute strength, the SU-152 had serious flaws. Its armor, while decent, was no match for German 88mm guns. A direct hit, especially from long range, often meant instant destruction. The crew compartment was a nightmare, cramped, hot, and packed with explosives and fuel. One of the fuel tanks sat right next to the driver. If the armor was breached, the result was usually catastrophic. Its rate of fire was painfully slow, about 2 rounds per minute if the loader wasn't exhausted or pinned. A second shot often came too late in a firefight. The gun had limited traverse, meaning the entire vehicle had to rotate to aim at moving targets. In an ambush, it was deadly. In open battle, it could be a sitting duck. Soviet commanders adapted. Instead of leading charges, SU-152s were often held just behind the front line, supporting infantry and tanks from 200 meters back. They were used to break strongpoints, flatten bunkers, and ambush advancing armor. Urban combat, in particular, became their specialty. A single round could turn an enemy-held building into rubble, taking its defenders with it. The gun wasn't subtle, but with the right tactics, it didn't need to be. The SU-152 had proven its worth, but its platform, the aging KV-1S, wasn't built for the long haul. Reliability issues, limited armor, and outdated design meant it couldn't evolve with the war. So the Soviets upgraded. They took the same monstrous gun and mounted it on the new IS chassis, stronger, better protected, and more reliable. The result? The ISU-152. The new vehicle had thicker armor, better suspension, and a more spacious interior, though spacious was still a relative term. It could now lead assaults more confidently, not just support them. Infantry squads began working directly alongside ISUs in cities, covering their flanks from Panzerfaust teams, while the big gun leveled resistance from range. Some later variants experimented with high-velocity guns to improve anti-tank performance. But the core idea stayed the same: heavy armor, massive gun, terrifying impact. The ISU-152 became a symbol of Soviet firepower, not precise, not elegant, but brutally effective. From a rushed battlefield fix to a frontline legend, the Beast Slayer had evolved. By the end of World War II, the battlefield had changed again. Tanks were getting faster, more versatile, and better armed. Specialized machines like the SU-152 and ISU-152, powerful but slow and limited, were no longer the future. After the war, the Soviet Union shifted its focus to main battle tanks. Fast, turreted, and capable of doing everything the old assault guns had done, only better. Still, the legacy of the Beast Slayer lived on. The ISU-152 remained in service for years, even into the Cold War, adapted for different roles, from heavy assault to artillery support. Over 4,000 were built before production ended in 1947. They were kept in reserve, rolled out in parades, and even considered for modernization. But their time had passed. What they left behind, though, was something unique. A moment in history where raw firepower solved a desperate problem. The SU-152 wasn't a marvel of engineering. It wasn't elegant. It was crude, violent, and rushed into existence. But it worked. And for a short, terrifying period of time, it made German heavy armor afraid, not because it was designed to, but because it could. The SU-152 was never meant to be a legend. It was a battlefield patch job, a blunt answer to a brutal question. But sometimes that's all war demands, not perfection, not elegance, just something that gets the job done. It wasn't supposed to kill tanks. It wasn't supposed to shape tactics. It wasn't even supposed to last. And yet, it earned a place in military history by doing exactly what no one expected. It stood toe-to-toe with the best German armor of the war and made them bleed. The Beast Slayer was ugly, slow, and unforgiving. But when it fired, the battlefield changed. Not because it was the best machine, but because it was the right weapon at the worst possible time. That's what made it unforgettable.